You're live.
Good morning, everybody. This is Matthew Rhodes, and thank you for being with me here today. We're going to be talking about a topic that is very sensitive to people. Actually, everything I'll be talking about is going to be sensitive to my listeners as you come on. And I want you to discover, that I am not singularly picking out anybody in terms of history in the form of prejudice, or I hope in this program to be as objective as I possibly can be in terms of historical events and how they've affected us. There are things that have occurred within the history of man's, timeline that have placed us right where we are today. Where we see ourselves struggling in the universe with all the news in the midst of everything that's happening. We're going to have those difficult conversations with one another. We're going to have to look at some old issues, and that's what I'm going to be doing today. And one of the things that we have to look at is that in man's historical man, since he's been keeping notes, writing about the events of his time, we notice there's certain patterns that emerge. There's certain shifts in the way he thinks. And we're talking about Western man here and all these things. So hopefully at some point we'll be able to talk about the thought among the varying cultures throughout the world. But for today, because we're dealing mostly with America and European culture, Western culture, that we have to just stay centered on how the worldview of that's around us and the people that we know. So one of the things that I did in the last program was to talk about this kind of epistemological shock, or just, you can call it a shockwave, and I called it 2.0 because those events happened around, say, the 1800s, the early 1800s. But this shockwave that I want to talk about today for Western man, began probably around the early 1500s. Say, like, we're going to start with talking about Martin Luther's Reformation and what that was significant, how that was significant to Western man. So let's, not focus on the religious aspect of that necessarily. Let's not take things personally. So when we talk about the ordered cosmos and what the pre-1500 world was like, it was that the church attempted, the Catholic Church in this case, attempted to mirror what they viewed as the ordered universe. So the ordered universe was, you had the heavens above with the angels, and you had and there was there were choirs of angels, and some of them were closer to God, some were further away. And we know that the angels, from the biblical descriptions of the angels, that they sometimes appeared and looked like men, but mostly they did not look like humans, and they almost looked alien in some cases. And that's probably why you see the word "fear not" appearing throughout the Bible hundreds of times. So the world was ordered around the truth flowing from the top down, and the church tried to reflect that that model. Probably, if you were going to go back and talk about the first epistemological shockwave, is the probably in the book of the Apocalypse in the Bible, where Satan says he will not serve man. His battle cry is non serviam. And this is because it is discovered that he will be serving mankind, a lesser being, and his pride would not allow that. His pride would not allow him to serve an inferior creature. And so that ideology is scattered all throughout the timeline of human Western history, of how people think in terms of pride and their ability to serve one another. And we would say that pride is the father of all sins. It's at least the father of all human psychological issues, for that matter. And so what happens in the Reformation in 1517 is that Luther rejects that mediating role, of the church, and he fractures the spiritual hierarchy. And the reason that's significant is because he decentralizes the authority of God on earth. And so people start reading the Bible. He introduces the idea of sola fide, which is faith alone, and sola scriptura, which is by scripture alone. And so the human beings they decentralize God's authority, which is given to the church, and then that becomes the authority of each person. So each person becomes almost like their own pope or their own priest, for that matter. And the information that God is giving to them is now through the Bible, through whatever their inner workings will tell them, and that becomes their interpretation of the universe. And so the Reformation, again, decentralizes God's authority. And shortly thereafter, I'm reading off my notes here because I don't have the memory of a 17-year-old. So I hope you guys can forgive that. Me looking away from the camera all the time and being a little bit nervous because this is my second time doing this. And I'm not doing this. I want you to know that I don't give you this information from some sort of lofty choir of, look at me, I'm this authority on something like that. I'm here sharing information, giving you something to think about, questions that you could ask yourself, and maybe take a look at the universe in a little bit of a different way, so that you can begin asking yourself the same questions. And these are the questions that I've always asked myself in my life, is like, how did we get to this situation? It can't be just these people are bad and these other people are good. That discussion is old and worn out. We all know it's old and worn out, that it's easy to just point fingers at each other all the time. And this guy's bad and that guy's bad. So let's just get rid of that. Let's ask us where we all are as a human being, where we are, where we're going, and how, especially more than anything, like how we got here. So everybody has heard of like Nicholas Copernicus. He publishes something called the Revolutionibus. My Latin is terrible, but it has to do with the order of of moving objects, and the orbs. And so the Earth was now, instead of under Copernicus being like this physical center of the universe, physical center of creation, now suddenly, we find that, the earth is not still. And what happens is now the church is no longer the center of the universe. God is not the center of the universe. And cosmologically, everything starts to shift spiritually and spatially. And I think I would have to imagine that there was a time that, man looked up to the heavens and said, okay, there's God and there's, the heavens. And at some point in time, people were like, oh, wait a second, I'm on a rock hurtling through space. This doesn't make sense. This has to be like the equivalent of somebody drunk behind the wheel of a car, waking up and suddenly they're heading towards, a brick wall or uncertainty or a cliff of some kind. That had to have been the psychological shockwave for man to suddenly become aware that things weren't as fixed and orderly as he thought they were. And so, between Luther and Copernicus, you start seeing this shift in the way people think. It's the man is not on a still point, but he's a passenger in motion on a moving vehicle, literally a rock. And then so later on, Galileo, takes his telescope, and he looks, into the heavens, and he starts observing that not only are we moving, but there's imperfections in these orbs, and the sun has spots on it. There's mountains on the moon. And so, suddenly, the world becomes mechanized, and the language of theology gives way to the language of mechanics, of, measurements and things like that. And so we are now like the observers. We are not living in a universe where we're being observed by God, but now we are the observers. We are the telescope replaces the altar. Okay. In so many words, like we no longer have altars. Each person is literally now creating their own religion based on this new altar. And then Newton comes along, and it gets even worse. So Newton now suddenly unites the worlds under these immutable laws. He says, okay, now this is the way things are. The order of the cosmos, by under the Christian theology, is completely shattered. And so that gives birth really literally to people that now see man as only an intimate part of that universe where, we are decoupled from the cosmos. We are no longer, waiting for a centralized authority to give us stuff, but we're observing this universe from a totally different vantage point. We're not waiting for that interpretation. We're creating the interpretation as we're going along. And this, gives birth to the age of reason and the rise of deism, and so we have these serious events that make it impossible for human being to not become where they are right now, their own priest, their own interpreter of moral relativity. A good book for everybody to read would be and I have it right over here. It's called the Economic Effects of the Protestant Reformation, and talks about Luther saying, like, realizing what he had done. He didn't really just go, oh, the church is bad, which is what he did. I mean, he had to imagine, and this happens to everybody. They say an institution is bad. They discover that people are evil within that institution, and they say, oh, well, that institution must be bad, must be wrong. And I always say it's like the equivalent of discovering that, you go to Target and you suddenly see that there's messes everywhere, and you say, oh, Target must be a terrible place to shop because there's clothes all over the place and dirt on the floor, but, I dismiss the idea that they may have a good product, So when we look at organizations, first of all, as Luther did, we can't say that the organization itself is corrupt. We say, oh, it wouldn't be corrupt if its doctrine would be better. And this is the same argument that, like, say, for instance, atheists use for Christianity. If Christianity were better, if it was a more solid system, that the people in Christianity would be better people. Well, that's just false. And that's where I'm going with all this, is that we have to understand that that man becoming, this sort of mechanized creature, he's on this rock floating through the universe, doesn't change and doesn't address the problem that man has. It doesn't address human nature and who we are. We still are back to that situation. And so all of the discussions that we have to center around that issue. They can't center around whether or not the institutions that he's part of have frailty and the people in them have frailty. We see that all throughout, the United States. We say, well, Americans did this. Jefferson had slaves. Washington was a Freemason, go on and on and on. We killed buffalo, we killed Indians, as Americans. And so that must mean, America is a corrupt country and stuff like that. And so this just gives birth to nihilism. But let me go back. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, and I hope you're following me up to this point, is that there is a series of changes, cyclical changes that happen. Man is not looking for an ordered universe. He can now read the Bible. He can, address what's inside and determine what it is that he believes. And Galileo creates what's known as, scientific determinism. And we're going to talk about that in a later show. Every event in the history of mankind has created its own splintered timeline. And that's one of the things we have to realize, is that nothing has happened in a vacuum. These events in our world. And so if you don't let me refer to my notes here again, there's something in the Bible that I think that we should all think about. And again, this isn't a Christian, or I am a Catholic. Many of my friends are Christians. I don't want you to think this is a Christian theological effort, to bring you along a path. This is just me approaching from the worldview that I have. And my worldview is what I've learned in my faith as a Catholic. And, there's something in the Bible that says, from Psalms, David, I think it's chapter 4, verse 8. So that I want to shout out to all my Protestant friends that a Catholic just quoted the Bible live on the air. And I hope you're very proud of me. However, we do read the Bible, so you all know. But David says to God, he says, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And so the fact of, when we have guys like Neil deGrasse, I think that's how you say his name, and all these other atheist scientists talking about how insignificant man is, and, would an alien that could fly across the universe be interested in coming to see us? That doesn't, man doesn't become insignificant. man is significant, because if we are alone in the universe, and there's no God that as that in the way that we think of, then that is very significant. That because that means we are literally the beginning, the apex of all creation in a very massive universe, and that's still significant in even in the biological sense of the word. But in the cosmological sense of the word, man is significant to his creator, because even though he is nothing, the creator of everything out of nothing is mindful of him and is interested in him and cares and is concerned, deeply interested in what he does and how he conducts himself in this life, and hopefully in the hereafter to be with that ordered universe, as we call it. So, so let's hopefully see that, we can't go down these blind alleys. They are blind alleys when our thinking only arrives at this one point, that man is evil, that man is incapable of taking care of himself. Man is quite capable of taking care of himself. Human beings are. And this is going to be significant later on, this idea when we start talking about why do we have the presence of organizations like the World Economic Forum? Why are there towns in Maine, where I live in Maine, and you could look me up, you could send me a letter and say, hey, you don't know what you're talking about, or I enjoyed your show, whatever it was. But why do we have towns that have 10,000 people in them with like 45 varying committees? None of them are ad hoc. They're all permanent standing committees. And some of them are leaning on monies that come from the federal government. And this hyper planning that has emerged is an attempt at recreating an ordered universe, because that's what is built into us. We are built into an ordered cosmos. The clockmaker is God, and we can't get around that. We will try to avoid it. We won't call it something religious. We'll try to say that we can think about whatever we want. We can create religions that say, oh, well, we don't like buildings. I have a friend that belongs to a church or something. I'm not sure if I understood it right, but its buildings are no good because they represent wealth, and God doesn't like buildings, and they're an affront to the poor or some sort of nonsense like that. And my apologies to my friend, but the fact that we need buildings to worship in, they give us a place of warmth, and, we're out of the element. And just because we have fancy buildings and somebody wants to make gold statues of some kind doesn't diminish anything about the people in those buildings that have a love for God. So, I would say that we have to admit that there has been a psychical shift, a psychical damage to mankind. And we're going to keep trying to go back to that unless we somehow answer the greater cosmological questions. And what is our place in the universe? Why are we here? What purpose do we have? And gimmicks are not going to fix that. Okay, that's what I want to say. Gimmicks are not going to fix that. We're not going to try to, rebrand anything. We're not going to fix this by diminishing, the expectations we should have of ourselves as human beings. We're not going to live in a world of moral relevancy that's going to fix anything. And so, so my breakdown of this, and I did write all this down. Maybe as I go and get better at this program, I won't have to make so many notes, and I can say what I want to say more comfortably. But we are going to have difficult conversations with each other. And when we start having those discussions about what our place in the universe is and how to find order, not under a world government, not under a government of people that look at mankind as a controlled animal, because honestly, in the absence of a creator, in the absence of God, whether you believe in God or not, there are people that are going to look at man as nothing more than an animal to be controlled, to be marginalized and quantified and define his purpose. And right now, that definition of purpose flows from a very materialistic point of view. It flows from a desire to have things, to produce, to amass wealth, to the point that the poor literally believes that it's their right to invade a store, steal all the stuff they need in there, as if though somehow, I don't know what their attempt is. I mean, maybe they're going to rob all this stuff from a store and start their own clothing line. I'm not sure. Maybe that's good. It's like, hey, that's one way to start a business. I don't know, but I doubt it. Or maybe they think that having all that stuff will somehow give them safety and security. But in the end, isn't that what everybody's looking for? Safety and security, knowing that they're going to be okay, that they have a way. But there is an answer to this. Stealing clothes out of a store, stealing from other people, the mayhem that is out there is not the answer. We do have the answer. It's right within every one of us, and we know what it is, but we're afraid to look at it. We're afraid to acknowledge the deep inner truth that's going to solve problems for everybody. But anyway, so let me just end with that. Let's say that there is an answer for man's existential neurosis. Man is greater than animals. If we don't acknowledge that, no answer that we have will not put us in a cage. So let's start looking at ourselves as a being who is